Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today I am joined by Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji from United Kingdom, and we are going to talk about a very interesting thing that happened in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. And to know all about this and why this is happening now, I mean, if I have to be able to explain this, it almost seems like there was another toolkit that's in play here. But let's find out all about it from our dear friend and esteemed guest, Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji. Pandit ji, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel.
Pranam ji, Namaskar ji, Jai Shri Ram, and Om Guru Bhyo Namaha. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation. We have, as you've so rightly mentioned, the House of Lords has reared its head again and has been making some quite remarkable decisions, choices, comments, speeches, debates. You won't be surprised to hear that yesterday, eight members of the House of Lords stood up and made some quite remarkable statements, most of them reeking of colonialist superiority and supremacy, most of them being directed towards denigrating anything Bharat, the largest democracy, does as being Hindu nationalism, and sadly, many of them being nothing other than Hindu-phobic attempts to tarnish Hindus. You can imagine our reaction and shock when our dear friend Lord Harries of the caste legislation debacle, that person who tried to insinuate that British Hindus were discriminating against other Hindus on a daily basis, he stood up in the House and started to talk about Mother Teresa and the fact that her FCRA status has been changed, her charity status has been changed. Now, I think most of us know that the reason that happened was because they failed to renew their application. But if you were to listen to the House of Lords speech, and I'll do my best to get hold of it later today, you wouldn't recognise that actually it was a failing on their behalf. Lord Harries went on to speak about Hindu nationalists being frightened that Indians would come into contact with Christianity and they might convert. And so this was the reason that all of these NGOs had their funds completely diminished and reduced. But the surprising thing was that this conversation, which started off about the FCRA regulations, suddenly moved to caste. One of the lords stood up and with no segue, no connectivity, no relationship to what we're talking about, stood up and decided to introduce caste. Now, we're quite used to this, but if you think about it, it's purely Hindu-phobic, isn't it? On a completely unrelated issue, to stand up and say, oh, what's the latest situation on the terrible Hindu caste system? It's nothing other than pure Hindu-phobia. You can't imagine a similar conversation, a similar debate being conducted, and that debate, let's say if it was about something to do with Islamism or something to do with the state of women's rights in one of the Arabian countries or Muslim countries, and somebody would suddenly just mention casually, drop into the conversation, oh, have we had any further news on Islamist terror attacks? You know, it's completely unrelated, and yet they did it. And the parade was the usual suspects. It's really quite tragic because I know there are lots of efforts being made for connections and improved business opportunities and closer relationships between the British public, members of the British public, the British government, certain departments, and their counterparts in Bharat. You know, a wonderful trade relationship would be a really good thing for both countries. But if you were to listen to the House of Lords, it's almost as though you've had a glimpse into the 1900s and the way in which they're talking about India, the largest democracy. It's almost as though they're talking about a colonial dominion, something where they have the right to scrutinize. You know, one of the lords said, I think it was Lord Harris, he said, we must get a written statement from Prime Minister Modi's government so that we can scrutinize it and assess it. You know, it literally was a snapshot back into the old 19th century. Quite strange.
So, Panditji, I'm curious if there is some sort of a smoking gun somewhere in the United Kingdom that, points at a certain minority of England, and this is being done as an elaborate cover up. Why I'm saying all this is I just put out a video of in which I tried to analyze the timing of the Islamophobic bill that Ilhan Omar most massively railroaded it through the Congress, and not one Democrat had the guts or the nerve to even ask questions. And they all voted along party lines. It won 219 to 212. Except on the 30th of October 2021, the FBI raided the house of a minority member in a place called Annandale in Virginia, and they found a master plan of the Muslim Brotherhood to destroy United States from within. And they
That's
have
right.
like one, two, three, four, five, six, and then you can start reading down and say, wait a minute, this happened that year, this happened this year, this is going to happen next. So I'm wondering, are there any parallels to what is happening in United Kingdom?
It's difficult not to draw the conclusion that there are parallels. We I think we have to bear in mind that there are elections coming up very soon in UP. We know the Punjab situation is also quite fragile, and we also know that in Punjab there has been a dramatic increase in ethnocide. And I would like to just gently remind everybody that although conversion and evangelism are fancy words, what they actually mean literally is ethnocide. It's the erasure of indigenous cultures. It's the severing of human beings from their ancestors' experience and wealth of knowledge. It is nothing other than ethnocide. And we know that ethnocide has been conducted increasingly in Punjab, which is also a border state. And so all of these sudden expressions of interest in the affairs of a democratically elected ally and friend from a group of peers who are clearly disconnected with reality and also with the time that we're in now. It's of course it's an act of mischief. It's visible. It's obvious, and it's a tragedy because I think that they act to the detriment of everybody. There's nobody who these little forays serve except that little clique who you've referred to, and that clique is really the heart of a colonialist establishment, which is now in its last death throes. The Church of England in this country has been dramatically diminished. There are so few young people aligning themselves to the church. The vast majority have distanced themselves because of the history of the church and its involvement with child sexual abuse and abuse of vulnerable adults. So in the United Kingdom, it's a declining force. But they do rely heavily on exploiting those innocent people who they can corrupt, who they can undermine, who they can sever from their ancestry for their revenue streams. It's nothing more than that. But I think the cost to the British public and to the Indo-British relationship far outweighs any benefit that they're likely to have accrue to them. It's really a sad thing to see.
Panditji, I might be wrong about this, but I just want to ask you the question anyway because I'm a little ignorant about these things. The Church of England is Protestant, isn't it?
It is. Its
Okay.
roots certainly are, but it's Anglican now, and they've morphed into their own version. Shall we
Of
say
Protestantism. Okay.
the franchise from the Roman Catholic Church?
Okay.
It acquired its own marketing and its own PR material when Henry VIII took it over, but ever since then it's charted its own course. But it's the same core product, it's the same key offering, and it's the same abusive history.
So, do the majority of Britishers follow the same denomination as Mother Teresa did?
Not at all. Mother Teresa was a member of a staunch pillar of the Roman Catholic Church. And in Britain, there is a parallel church. The Roman Catholic Church has its own identity. And so the marketplace has got two dominant players. There is the monopolistic one, which started off the whole process. Then there is the Johnny come lately number two, which sort of is competing in the same marketplace and for the same revenue streams. And both of them share exactly the same profile in terms of abuse of indigenous civilizations and cultures. The Mother Teresa was one of the, shall we say, she was a PR dream for the Roman Catholic Church. She so successfully managed to wield the suffering of people in Bharat and convert it and monetize it to fill the coffers of the Vatican. This is a well documented path, and the history is very, very well covered. She was referred to as, I think, Hell's Angel by Christopher Hitchens, who did a lot of research, and Arup Chatterjee, I'd like to give a shout out to. He wrote a wonderful book detailing the Sisters of Mercy, these missionaries, and the reality of who they were, and it makes for terrible reading. And so what they're seeing is one of their idols, Mother Teresa, is being proven to have what are called feet of clay. An idol is tumbling, and they just can't really withstand. They can't put up with the notion that one of their superb brands, which has generated so much money, is actually now causing them to be concerned, and people are tarnishing it. Maybe you heard in Bharat and in the US that a statue of a guy called Colston, which was a statue in the center of Bristol, was pulled down by protesters and thrown into the sea in protest.
Yes.
Now he was a slaver. There's no doubt about it. He made lots of money on the misfortune of the African people. And so it's not right that his statue should be there as a benefactor to the town. And that statue, that idol, has tumbled. We're seeing Mother Teresa tumbling for the abuses of human rights and the child trafficking that her institution is involved in. But these members of the upper chamber, they have an incredible sense of amnesia and myopia combined, and that they can't remember that only a few decades ago they were destroying Bharat, picking it apart like vultures on a living being, and that's the amount of misery they caused. And all of a sudden, they've forgotten all of that, and yet they stand on their high horse and seem to project sanctimonious morality when their feet are really on very shaky ground.
Panditji, I again need a bit of a clarification before I ask my next question.
Yeah.
Would you say that the majority of United Kingdom is Protestant, denomination-wise?
I would say the majority of the United Kingdom, in reality, at this point in time, is not Christian. That's certain. And for the first time in the census, I think people selected denominations other than Christian. For the first time, it went less than 50%. And so the majority are tending to be atheist or spiritual and not religious, agnostic, and other traditions. So it's certainly a minority in the United Kingdom now.
Okay, understood, understood. Now, I was just curious that, a Protestant wouldn't be caught dead, literally and figuratively, in a Roman Catholic church. And yet, these people are suddenly so concerned about the Roman Catholic Church or the member of the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, it's like all of these things. There are two faces, aren't there? There are one, but by making a statement, one, who do you support? And two, who do you denigrate and vilify? And so when it comes to vilifying Hindus, it doesn't really matter who you support. That's an allegiance, a temporary marriage of convenience, which serves admirably for the purpose that it's chosen for. And it really is a tragedy that this is still going on. In the 21st century, we have these colonialist relics who are suffering from this inability to recognize that the world really needs them to put down their weapons of mass destruction, because that's what their ideology is. It's a weapon of mass destruction, and the history bears that out. And they're not willing to lay down arms and look for peaceful settlements. They really should. It's about time that these institutions stopped peddling and seeding hatred. And there's no chance that their actions are going to go unnoticed. In this world that we live in today, we no longer have this little cushioned pirate island tucked away a long way away where somebody could beat a retreat to with their stolen gold and wealth and then hide there and not have to face the music. We're in a connected world. And so when a person commits the atrocities that Mother Teresa did, and an aged, formerly respected member of the House of Lords stands and tries to make political capital for his missionary machine, it's going to be noticed instantly. And the impact of it is not going to be of benefit for community cohesion. They really need to stop doing this now.
Now, Panditji, I was hoping to see some questions. I don't see there any questions. There's anything else that you'd like to touch upon? Please feel free, sir, and then we
Well,
can call it a wrap.
wonderful. I just wanted to share that, and let's say in the fullness of time, we will have the videos and we'll be able to dissect it point by point and
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
explore the mind that is behind this. But there are a couple of other points that are worthy of mention. As I was listening to the House of Lords speech and the moral high ground which they perpetually seek to occupy and colonize and to speak from, it struck me that only this week, Sir Tony Blair has been made a knight of the realm. And everybody is now having a debate as to why was that given to him. There is a petition where almost 1 million people have demanded that he be stripped of that knighthood because he took Britain into an illegal war. It's one of those secrets, the elephant in the British corridors of power, which nobody wants to sort of look at, is that Tony Blair was guilty of crimes against humanity. There are more than enough people who have proven this to be the case. His own video recorded testimony, in which he deceives Parliament, deceives the people of this country, speaks with its own quality and its own status of being truth. And yet he has been given a knighthood. And so this is another example of the tussle that the British colonialist establishment is having with its own population. The people are saying, we want higher standards. But now that tension between the ruling classes, British upper ruling classes, Burkes for short, that tension is becoming very, very noticeable. But when you reflect on other knights, if you think back to the time of the Crusades, people were granted a knighthood because they had the courage to go to the Middle East and to kill Muslims. And if you think of the lineage that Tony Blair is now attached to, he is probably the one knight who was responsible for certainly the deaths of 500,000 Iraqis. And the figures are that it's the consequential loss of life is likely to be in the region of about 1 million. And that nation, that civilization, the old Iraqi civilization, was virtually erased. So this is the act of a crusader. And what else is it that he has done which is worthy of being granted a knighthood? And the British public don't accept this. They do not like the notion that somebody, I think there were 1 million British people who marched in the streets of London to demand that Britain do not go to this illegal war. And so there is a massive movement in the country itself, which is rejecting the actions of these people who sit in their parliamentary bubble, completely disconnected with the zeitgeist, with the mood of the time, and the necessity to make grown-up, mature, adult 21st century decisions. Sadly, there are just not enough of them coming out of Parliament. What else? Our dear, no, I'm sorry, I can't say our dear friend. The person who we've spoken about in the past, formerly Lord Nazir Ahmed of Rotherham, he has been found guilty of criminal charges, the abuse of minors, and sentencing will be passed in a very short space of time. So this is just another additional name to the litany, the list of these parliamentarians. You can roll them off one by one. We have Claudia Webb, found guilty of threatening to throw acid on a person. We have the Right Honourable Keith Vaz, who was found guilty of soliciting drugs from rent boys. We now have Sir Tony Blair, who is a war criminal. We have Lord Nazir, who has been found guilty of equally heinous crimes. So, and these are supposedly the political masters and the political servants who are required to set an example for all other public servants to follow. No, I'm sorry, it's not going to wash for much longer, and you can almost sense a mood of anger in the country that we're paying taxation to a group of individuals who are not fit for purpose, and certainly the nation is not getting its money's worth. A similar scenario to what precipitated the Civil War in the United States. All we need now is a Boston Tea Party, but I suspect it won't be in Boston; it will be in Westminster, where members of the parliamentary classes will be educated by the British public, who are very robust and they're very patient, they're very long-suffering, but when it comes to a particular point, they have a very earthy, almost Punjabi type of response to this, and I see that drawing closer every day. We really do need them to understand that they are not beyond reproach.
So, do the English still remember the famous comment of Tony Blair? I don't have a reverse gear.
Oh dear, I can understand that, but the cliff is still there. You know, that comment's wonderful when you're on a racetrack, but not so good when you're approaching a cliff.
So true, so true. Well,
If I can just add another little sort of
yes.
verbal hand grenade in there, one of the comments that the Lords made was to express concern, and it was delivered with pathos. It was delivered with, the appropriate dramatic gestures to express concern for the poorest members of the Indian society and how these NGOs work so hard to reach these people. And if the money is dries up and they're not allowed to get it, then how on earth will those poor people be looked after? You know, that white savior syndrome on steroids that sometimes happens. Well, what struck me was if they really wanted to act in the best interests of those poor people, well, why not pay back some of that $45 trillion that was stolen over 280 years? Why not empty the coffers of the Bank of England and all these tax havens where they hid the ruling classes hid their loot? You know, why not genuinely make some reparation for the civilizational damage done to the Indian people? Of course, when it comes to that point, they all shuffle off into the corridors of power and go and try and find a subsidized cup of tea. But these are the questions that are being put forward and being asked, and I see no answers. I think the days of British deployment of sanctimony as a tool of political statecraft they're drawing to a rapid close.
Well, that was a fascinating, recounting of what has been playing out in the House of Lords. I'm really at a loss for words today because I'm amused more than anything else because this is what I would call as a template for a toolkit. I'm wondering which other country is going to do something very similar. So I'm very curious. At least if it does happen, you heard it here first. So Panditji, as always, a pleasure having you on our channel. Thank you very much, sir, and namaskar.
Pranam ji, namaskar ji, Jai Shri Ram ji, and thank you very much, Sriji. Best wishes, and let's speak soon.